This lecture is a companion to the previous lecture that you just watched on the formal elements of art. We will be talking here about the principles of design. So, with the principles of design, the relationship that there is between the formal elements is that design is basically the ways in which the formal elements are arranged. So, in many ways, we're building upon the knowledge that we acquired in that previous lecture on formal elements. Okay, we're going to start out with the design principle known as emphasis. Now, with emphasis, this is a way in which the artist can help the viewer focus their attention to make sure that the viewer is paying attention to the details that are really important for communicating the message. Now, with a work of art, such as this one, for example, there's a lot going on. And so the viewer can't be expected to look at every single thing because they might miss some of these important details. So, what an artist will do is they will create an area of emphasis. And this will be, I usually think it's about half the composition, sometimes maybe a third, somewhere in there. It's a pretty good section of the composition. And that's going to be the area where your eye is going to hang out the most. And so, like, for example, in this painting, here's our area of emphasis, okay? And then back in here, this is the background. It just frames the scene. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't give us any information. It's just blank. And so this is where we're going to hang out. Now, artists can get a little bit more specific in what they want to emphasize, and they usually do. And they'll get more specific by creating what's known as a focal point. And the focal point is arguably the most important single spot in the entire work of art. And it's this spot that has the primary responsibility of conveying the meaning of the work, more so than any other part of the composition. So, because the spot is so important, the artist is going to make sure that you continually come back to it. Now, sometimes you'll start right at the focal point. It'll immediately grab your attention. And you'll look around, but your eye keeps being brought to that spot. You need to be careful though, because sometimes there'll be something else that'll immediately capture your attention, but then you're led to something else within the composition. So focal point can be intuitive, which is good news. You usually can kind of sense what the focal point is, but at the same time, you do have to be careful because it's not going to always be the first thing that catches your eye. Now, I have a couple of examples of focal point, and I wanted to start out with one that was really obvious. And so this is a focal point that does capture your attention, and it does a pretty good job of holding it. And that focal point would be the lobster right in here. Now, with focal point, the way that it's achieved is that the artist is going to manipulate various formal elements to capture your attention. This might be a good opportunity for you to pull out your notes from the formal elements lecture. So maybe pause the video, go get them, or turn your notebook to those pages and then come back. You don't need to take notes per se. This is more of like a looking exercise, but I think following along in your notes is a good way to review formal elements. So what is it about this lobster that catches your attention? That might be something else you might want to pause the video, think about, maybe make some notes. See what your notes compare to with mine. Now, this is a great painting to introduce this concept of focal point because there's a lot of things that the artist does to really make this lobster stand out. So the first thing that this person does is they put the lobster in the center. Typically, when somebody looks at a work of art, and there are exceptions to this, they will start in the center. So putting the focal point in the spot where someone's going to start looking, great strategy. Now, not only is the lobster in the center, it also is large in size. Okay, if you compare the lobster to other objects within the painting, you can see that it's larger in size. So that's going to grab our attention. Because it's larger in size, it has a lot of details that are apparent. And that's going to also capture our attention because there's a lot of things that we can look at. We can look at this interesting pattern of dots along the claw that makes it look kind of rough. Some little like cross hatching situation here. More of these interesting dots. I really like this part of the painting a lot. Here's a little eye. There's these really bright white lines that indicate the texture and the sheen of the shell. And that's another formal element is light, this spotlight light. You can even kind of like see the edges of it here that like shines right on this lobster, really making it super apparent. So we've got that going on as well. Another thing is we can think about color. You might have noticed, wow, this is an intense red. We know that red is a warm color, jumps out at the viewer. And what I like about this example is it's a good lesson to you that not all warm colors are created equal, because we actually have kind of a lot of warm colors in this painting. We've got yellows, we've got some oranges, but the red, I mean, that really is popping out. So that's something to keep in mind. Another aspect that we might want to think about a formal element is space. Space is an important one. Now, in our area of emphasis, it's pretty crowded, but because this is elevated, there's more space around it, and that will capture our attention as well. We can also think about everybody's favorite, which is implied lines. See if you can identify some lines that lead to this lobster. The lobster leads itself to itself. That's very meta. We have a line that leads up like this. Maybe if you were hanging out down in here, you've got this line that kind of starts to lead us up this way. Here's some lines that lead us this way. So there we have another point of focus through the use of implied lines. Let's take a look at another example. So here we have this amazing black figure Greek vase painting, and it's Ajax and Achilles playing a game. Now, this here, we see again a reliance on implied lines and actual analytical lines. That really is what creates the focal point here. We've got lines leading like this, lines leading like this, so that our focus is right here on the game. Now, this might seem like a surprising focal point because it seems like kind of a minor area within the composition. Here you've got these guys and they have this really interesting, intricate armor. They've got these incredible pointy beards. This is an amazing hat. You would think that this is what would be encouraged to look at and not this kind of like blank space down in here. And this is where you have an opportunity to kind of check your work in a way. This work, and you can do this by looking at the title, this work is about playing a game. So the game and not necessarily the players is what we want to be focusing on. And if we can go back, all of this amazing objects right here, but still life with lobster and bread. Lobster is in the title. It makes sense that that would be the focal point. So, for example, you might have been initially attracted to these cherries. Oh, they're interesting. They're round. They are that red color, that warm color that jumps out. But cherries are maybe they're grapes, I'm not really sure what fruit that is. It's not on the title, and so it might and should make us suspicious that, we might be misidentifying the focal point. Now, there is such a thing as no focal point. That's not a law. It doesn't have to be in there. And we call works of art that do not have a focal point afocal, no focal point. And if you look at this amazing, beautiful front piece to an Islamic Quran, this is a great example. What makes it afocal is that there's no one part of the piece that is standing out to you, that's grabbing your attention, that's continually attracting your eye even as it moves around. Everything here is treated equally. This is all equal. This is all equal. These beautiful gold squares in the middle, they're all equal. Everything's equal. So the idea is that your eye just continually roams around and it doesn't stop. Now you might think, well, why would an artist do this? Why would they want us to just keep moving, moving, moving? And this is when you have to think about the piece of in and of itself and maybe some of the motivations that an artist had with creating the work. So this is the front piece of a Quran, which is the religious text of the Islamic faith. With a lot of these Quran, they contain these painted images that essentially are pattern. And so the idea is with pattern, and this isn't just only seen with Islamic art. You can see this with Christian art, you can see this with Buddhist art, this emphasis on pattern and repetition. Because what happens is the eye is attracted to similarity. So the eye moves around, and the idea is that as the eye is moving around, it kind of puts you into this trance-like state that really is helpful if you're praying or you're meditating or you're reflecting. And so here, instead of just like focusing on one spot and concentrating and thinking about that one spot, the lack of a focal point keeps your eye consistently moving so that you can get into that sort of worship, spiritual contemplation headspace. Now we will talk about unity. Okay, unity just by itself, don't worry about these other terms that you see on the screen. We know this word unity, it means unified. So the way that a work of art can be unified is through sameness, things being the same. Now, we can get more specific than this if we want to. There is visual unity, and there is conceptual unity. Now, with visual unity, it means that everything looks the same. So we've got, for example, these guys, and they're wearing the same skirt with the fringe. They're sitting in the same way. They are positioned their bodies in the same way. They're all holding a cup. They're all the same color. They're all relatively the same size. There's some really clear unity that's going on right here. Now we want to think about why. Okay, remember in the first lecture, I talked about how there's two parts. There's the visual aspect, what things look like, which I just described to you. But then the motivation, the reason, the psychological impact. Why would an artist choose to make such a highly unified composition? So in this area of the composition, this is the leader. And what's happening is the leader is overseeing this banquet that's a triumph, a celebration of a war victory. This is the standard of Ur. It comes from Mesopotamia, and there's actually two sides to this. One side shows the war, and then the other side, this is the peace side, shows the celebration, the enjoyment of winning a victory and returning to a state of calm and peace. So these people These are important people that are part of the government, part of the administration. And so by showing them in this unified way, it's showing that they are unified, that they are a group, and that they're conforming to the leader that we see here. That as a whole, these people, they follow this leader. They're not like individuals going rogue, doing their own thing. They're part of an organization that acts to support the leadership and power of this figure here. And there's a way that I know that this person is the leader beyond just, me knowing about this work of art. If I didn't know anything about this work of art, there's a way that I could deduce that. And I'll come back and I will show you what I'm talking about once I teach you how you can make this identification. Now, we also have conceptual unity. And what this is when people are, or objects, people, they're unified according to a concept. So they're unified in that they are paying homage to this king. They're all doing the same thing. We see conceptual unity down here because all these guys are working. So there's our conceptual unity. Visual and conceptual unity are really closely tied. And usually you can talk about them together. And I suggest that you do because it offers a much more richer interpretation. Now, I just want to mention repetition. Repetition, this also is a design principle, and this is when something is being repeated. So unity can be created in a lot of different ways. One way is repetition, repeating the same skirt, repeating the same seating, etc. But you can also see that visual unity can be through like same color, this gorgeous lapis blue that we see here, here, and here. So repetition, that's its own principle of design, but it definitely has a relationship to unity. And here's just one more example of unity. This is another Greek vase painting, earlier than our Ajax and Achilles example. And just wanted to show you, more examples of visual and conceptual unity. So this is a great example right in here. So here we have our visual unity. We have these people who all appear the same size, same abstract treatment of the body, same position with the arms raised. And what's happening is these people are attending a funeral procession. Here's the dead person. It's a guy, dead guy up here. And they are about to be burned on the funeral pyre. So we can talk about conceptual unity and this idea that they all attend the same ritual. The arms raised up like this actually indicates that these people, and these are women, are mourning. Now, the reason why I can tell they're women, because it's not super obvious right here, and actually the body looks exactly the same as this guy, is because women were traditionally the ones tasked with mourning at a funeral. They would cry, they would raise their arms up, they'd like rip their clothes open because they're so sad, they're so grieving. That this guy has so many mourners indicates that he is really important. And that information is located down here where there's a military procession. This guy gets a whole military procession as part of his funeral, which indicates that he is part of the military or he's a ruler. Someone like you and I, we might have like 2 people, but we're definitely not having a military procession. So that's how I know this is a man, is because of the military component. We don't have evidence that women served in the military in ancient Greece, but we do know that they were the mourners. So all of these women with their arms raised, the conceptual unity is that they're all shown mourning. They're all united in their grief, whether that's actual grief or what I suspect to be performative grief. performing the grief. And the last design principle that I'm going to talk about is scale. Scale refers to size. Now, when we talk about scale, there's 3 ways that somebody can determine scale or the size of something. One of the ways is by comparing the object to like kind. Now, what I mean by that is, like, for example, this is the Notre Dame Cathedral. This is not the super famous one. That's the one that's in Paris. A lot of cathedrals created during the Gothic period were called Notre Dame. This one is located in the city of Chartres. So comparing buildings to other buildings, right? This is a building, so compare it to an object of like kind, another building. So we can compare these 2 buildings here. Now, it gives you the sense that, okay, this building's tall, but that's super vague. And it's not really that helpful because, buildings can be different sizes. How tall exactly is this building? We're not entirely sure. Now, another way you can determine scale is you can determine scale by comparing the object to something from nature, like a tree or a mountain. Now, we have a little bit of a tree here on the side, but then again, sizes of trees are relative. How tall is this tree? How tall is this tree? How tall is this tree? Again, it's ambiguous. We can compare and say, okay, this is tall because there's these trees, but we can't be specific. Now, the third way to determine scale, and this really is the most effective, is to compare it to the size of a person. We all have a sense of approximately how tall an average adult is. I don't know, between like 5'6" and 5'8", somewhere in there. That is a much more specific sense of scale. Now, this photograph is a little bit misleading because you do have people, but they're at varying distances from the structure, and that is going to affect our sense of scale. Now, we still can say, okay, these people compared to here, this is tall. But really, you want to look at the ones even closer, and you can see, like, wow, this is really tall. So scale, size. Now, when we think about size often relates to power, it relates to authority, because something that's really big has a strong physical presence that can be intimidating. Whereas if we are interacting with something very small, we have that stronger physical presence. We dominate that smaller object. So we want to think about power and authority often when we're thinking about scale. So seeing this large church with these spires that go way up into the sky, the idea is to express the power of God. This is a Christian church. The power of God, the authority of God. This is meant to be awe-inspiring. We're meant to feel small in comparison to this awesome grandeur. Now, here's another example. And you're noticing probably that I'm showing you architecture. We've also got some sculpture here as well. Typically with scale, because we're talking about size, this mostly is going to relate to three-dimensional works of art. This doesn't mean that you can't relate it to a painting, because you could talk about like a painting that's large in size, or you can talk about a painting or another two-dimensional work that contains what we call hierarchical scale. Hierarchical scale is where size is used to convey hierarchy. Size is used to convey power. We are going to see this so much in this class. Now, here's an example. This is the facade, the outer face of the Temple of Ramses II. Here we have differing guises of Ramses seated. He's giant, he's huge. If you look down here, here's some ladies. These ladies are his different wives. They were polygamous in ancient Egypt. They had lots of wives. And you can see here that by having these wives smaller in size, it indicates that Ramses II is more powerful. Now we can maybe sort of extend this out a little bit, and we can also use this as an opportunity to examine marriage dynamics in ancient Egypt. They're also smaller, not just because he's more powerful because he's the pharaoh and their queens, but also in traditional marriage dynamics, he's more authoritative as the husband, while she is more submissive as the wife. Now, what's also interesting is you can look, and you'll notice that the women are of different sizes. So that indicates that among these women, there's also a level of hierarchy as well. And that was true. The Egyptians would have their great wife, the first wife, she was the most important. And then the other wives would have lessening hierarchies based on the quality of the heirs that they produced for the pharaoh. Now, you can also think about hierarchical scale in terms of the relationship between the artwork and the viewer. Here, these are giant. Here's some people, give us a sense of scale, powerful over the viewer. So if we were living back in ancient Egypt during the 19th dynasty when this Ramses II was around, us mere, average people, we would stand here, we'd be dominated by these figures, and it would be very clear to us that Ramses II is powerful and we are not. Now, as promised, if I can go back, let's return to the standard of Ur. So I had said this guy is the king, and there was ways to get a sense of that power even with not knowing anything about the work of art. And so what you see is you see people looking. So implied line makes this person the focal point, but also we have hierarchical scale, much larger in size in compared to these people. Another clue, this amazing skirt, much more intricate in compared to these figures here. So those are some clues. And another clue I just thought of. Remember last lecture, we talked about in the formal elements, we talked about vertical placement. So here, this person's higher up vertically, and that indicates power. Now, this person's not higher up vertically than these people, but definitely higher up vertically than these people. And there's some hierarchy that's being suggested through that vertical placement as well. So that's another argument that you can prove, you can use to prove. The point is, and I cannot repeat this enough, is that when you make an interpretation, you have to provide evidence. And in this case, we're using visual evidence, the material in the artwork. So you can't just say this guy's powerful, move on, call it a day. You have to give proof, evidence from the artwork itself that supports your argument that this person is powerful. This concludes our lecture on principles of design. With our knowledge of formal elements and principles of design, you are now ready to move on to formal analysis.